Cole Merrick pressed his back against the kitchen counter, watching his wife through the archway that led to their living room. Taryn sat cross-legged on the couch, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones that stopped whenever he entered the room. "No, I can't tonight," she said, glancing toward the kitchen. "I told you Cole's here." The conversation ended abruptly when she noticed him watching. She set the phone face down on the coffee table and smiled the same smile she'd worn for 13 years. But something had shifted behind her eyes over the past few months. "Who was that?" Cole asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Just Emma from the volunteer group. We're organizing the food drive next week." Taryn stood and smoothed her jeans. "I might be late getting home tomorrow. We have a planning meeting." Cole nodded, but his mind cataloged the lie. Taryn had mentioned 3 different volunteer meetings this month, all on nights when she'd come home with her hair smelling like cigarettes and cologne. She'd quit smoking 5 years ago, and he didn't wear cologne. Their daughter Lennox appeared in the doorway, clutching a stuffed elephant against her chest. At 5 years old, she possessed an unsettling awareness of adult tensions, her dark eyes moving between her parents like she was solving a puzzle. "Daddy, can you read to me tonight?" Lennox asked. "Of course, sweetheart." Cole knelt to her level. "Go pick out a book." As Lennox skipped away, Cole noticed Taryn's phone buzzing against the table. The name Emma V. flashed on the screen, but when Taryn saw it, she quickly declined the call. "I thought you were just talking to Emma," Cole said. "Different Emma." Taryn's laugh sounded forced. "You know how many Emmas there are in this town." That night, after tucking Lennox in a bed, Cole lay in their bedroom listening to Taryn's breathing. When he was certain she was asleep, he slipped out of bed and went to his home office. He opened his laptop and pulled up their phone records. The number Taryn had called during her volunteer meeting conversations belonged to a Miles Corbin. Cole's system security background had taught him to follow digital breadcrumbs, and within 30 minutes, he'd found Miles Corbin's social media profiles, his employment history, and his criminal record. Dishonorably discharged from the Army. Multiple arrests for assault. Currently unemployed, but somehow affording a cabin outside the city limits. Cole's jaw tightened as he scrolled through photos of Miles' broad shoulders, military tattoos, the kind of dangerous edge that some women found irresistible. In several recent photos, Cole spotted a detail that made his blood run cold. The same silver bracelet Taryn had started wearing 3 months ago. He closed the laptop and returned to bed, where Taryn lay with her back to him, phone charging on her nightstand. He could hear her heartbeat in the quiet room, steady, untroubled, guilty of nothing in her own mind. Cole stared at the ceiling until dawn, his thoughts crystallizing into something sharp and unforgiving. The next evening, Taryn announced another volunteer meeting. She kissed his cheek and ruffled Lennox's hair before heading to the garage. "Tell Mommy to come back soon," Lennox said from her spot on the living room floor, where she was coloring. "What do you mean, baby?" Lennox looked up, crayon poised above her drawing. "She goes to the secret house now. She said it's our special place, but I haven't seen it yet." Cole's pen stopped moving across the work reports he'd been reviewing. "What secret house?" "The one with the big man. Mommy says he's going to take care of us." Lennox returned to her coloring, unaware that her innocent words had just confirmed her father's worst suspicions. Cole set his papers aside and knelt beside his daughter. "Lennox, when did Mommy tell you about this house?" "Yesterday, when we went to the store. She said soon we might go live there, and I could have my own room with horses on the walls." Lennox held up her drawing a house surrounded by trees, with 3 stick figures standing in front. "That's me, Mommy, and the big man. Where's Daddy in the picture?" Lennox tilted her head, considering. Mommy said Daddy might be too busy with work to come. Cole's hands remained steady as he praised Lennox's artwork, but inside, something cold and methodical was taking shape. He'd spent years securing computer systems against infiltration. Now he would apply those same principles to protecting his daughter from a different kind of threat. That night, he began documenting everything. Scene 2. The collapse 3 weeks later, Cole was reviewing security protocols at his office when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Lennox's preschool. "Mr. Merrick? This is Principal Davies. You need to come to the school immediately. Lennox has had an incident." Cole's drive to the school took 8 minutes, but he counted every second. When he arrived, Two police cruisers sat in the visitor parking spaces, their emergency lights casting red and blue shadows across the building's brick facade. Officer Santos met him at the main entrance. "Mr. Merrick, your daughter is stable, but we're treating this as a potential poisoning case." "Poisoning?" "The paramedics are with her now. Before you go in." Santos placed a hand on Cole's shoulder. "Peek inside quietly. We don't want to overwhelm her." Cole followed the officer through the administrative hallway toward the nurse's office. Through the partially open door, he could see Lennox lying on the small cot, her face pale and her eyes glassy. A paramedic knelt beside her, checking her pulse. But it was the scene near the staff hallway that made Cole's blood freeze. Taryn stood in urgent conversation with a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Cole recognized him immediately from the social media photos Miles Corbin. Taryn's body language was tense, her hands gesturing emphatically as she spoke in whispers. "Told you to wait in the car," she hissed. "I wanted to make sure." Miles stopped speaking when he noticed Cole's approach. In one fluid motion, he turned and walked quickly toward the back exit, his boots echoing against the polished floor. "Sir!" Officer Santos called after him, but Miles had already pushed through the emergency door, triggering a brief alarm. Taryn spun around, her face a mask of maternal concern. "Cole! Oh God, I'm so scared. They called me right after they called you." She rushed to embrace him, but Cole noticed the tremor in her hands and the way her eyes darted toward the exit where Miles had disappeared. "Who was that man?" Cole asked. "What man?" "I don't. I was just talking to the school counselor." Taryn's voice pitched higher. "Cole, our baby is sick. Can we focus on that?" The paramedic emerged from the nurse's office. "She's conscious and responsive. We're taking her to Portland General for observation." As they followed the ambulance to the hospital, Cole drove in silence while Taryn made a series of phone calls, canceling appointments and notifying family members. But between calls, he watched her in his peripheral vision. Her breathing was too controlled. Her concern, too, performed at the hospital. Dr. Martinez delivered the preliminary diagnosis. Lennox ingested a significant amount of diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in Benadryl. It's not life-threatening, but the dosage was substantial enough to cause drowsiness and disorientation. "How could that happen?" Taryn asked, her hand pressed her chest. "We don't even have Benadryl in the house. The symptoms suggest it was mixed with food." "What did she have for lunch today?" "I packed her lunch this morning," Taryn said quickly. "Peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, and a juice box. Same thing I always pack." Dr. Martinez made notes on his tablet. "We'll need to run additional tests, but she should be fine with rest and monitoring. You can take her home tonight if her levels stabilize." For hours later, they carried a sleeping Lennox into their house. Cole tucked her into bed while Taryn paced the hallway, phone pressed to her ear again. "No, not tonight," she whispered. "Something happened. I'll call you tomorrow." After Taryn went to bed, Cole returned to the kitchen and noticed something that made him pause. Two empty lunch containers sat in the trash, one pink, one blue. Lennox only took one lunch to school each day. He lifted both containers out of the garbage. The pink one smelled faintly of peanut butter. The blue one had a different scent, something medicinal and sweet, like children's liquid medicine. Cole photographed both containers, then carefully placed them in separate plastic bags. In his home office, he opened a new folder on his encrypted drive and labeled it Evidence. The first entry read, Day 1, Lennox poisoned. 2 lunch containers. Taryn lied about packing only one. The next morning, Detective Jolene Graves arrived at their house to interview both parents. She was a compact woman in her 40s with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. This is standard procedure for any case involving a child ingesting a controlled substance, she explained, settling into their living room chair. I need to understand the timeline of events. Taryn sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. I packed Lennox's lunch at 7:30, same as always. Turkey sandwich, carrots, and water. Cole frowned. Yesterday you said it was peanut butter. Did I? Taryn laughed nervously. I was so shaken up. You know how stress affects memory. Detective Graves made a note. Mrs. Merrick, Do you keep any antihistamines in your house? No. Well, maybe some old allergy pills in the medicine cabinet, but nothing we actively use. Linux doesn't have allergies. What about in your car or purse? I don't think so. I mean, I haven't checked recently. The detective turned to Cole. Mr. Merrick, did you notice anything unusual about your daughter's behavior before the incident? Cole chose his words carefully. She's been talking about places and people I don't recognize. Sometimes children have active imaginations, but she's mentioned a house and a man that aren't part of our regular routine. Taryn's face paled. Kids make up stories all the time. You know how Lennox loves fairy tales. What kind of stories? Detective Graves asked. Just silly things about secret houses and adventures. Nothing concerning. Taryn stood abruptly. Can I get anyone coffee? I need to check on Lennox anyway. As Taryn left the room, Detective Graves leaned forward. Mr. Merrick, in your professional opinion, you work in security, correct? Would you say someone had deliberate access to your daughter's food? It's possible, Cole said. The school has protocols, but they're not foolproof. When Taryn returned, she carried a small pink pill bottle. I found this in my gym bag. I forgot I had it. She handed it to Detective Graves. It's Benadryl. I bought it weeks ago for a rash, but I never used it. Detective Graves examined the bottle. The safety seal was broken, and several pills were missing. When did you last go to this gym? 3 days ago. Maybe 4? I don't remember exactly. Cole watched his wife's performance with growing clarity. Every inconsistency, every deflection, every nervous gesture built a clearer picture of deception. Taryn wasn't just lying, she was constructing an alibi. After Detective Graves left, Cole found Taryn in their bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. This is a nightmare, she said. How could someone do this to our baby? Cole sat beside her, studying her profile. The detective seemed thorough. Too thorough. All these questions, like we're suspects or something. Taryn looked at him with tear-filled eyes. You don't think I would ever hurt Lennox, do you? Of course not, Cole said, but his voice carried no warmth. That evening, while Taryn took Lennox to the pediatrician for a follow-up appointment, Cole conducted his own investigation. He searched their house methodically, photographing everything. In Taryn's jewelry box, he found a second cell phone, a cheap prepaid model with a recent call history full of numbers he didn't recognize. The text messages told a story of escalating desperation. We need to move faster. He's getting suspicious. The lawyer says we need documented evidence of instability or abuse. 1 more month, and we'll have everything we need. I can't keep pretending much longer. Cole photographed every message, every call log, every contact. Then he carefully returned the phone to its hiding place. When Taryn and Lennox came home, Lennox ran to Cole with a clean bill of health from the doctor. Taryn seemed calmer, more confident. Dr. Peterson thinks it was probably an accidental exposure at school, she announced. Maybe someone gave her something by mistake, or she found pills on the playground. That's a relief, Cole said, lifting Lennox onto his lap. But as he read to his daughter that night, Cole's mind was already 3 steps ahead, mapping out the evidence he would need and the allies he would have to recruit. His wife had tried to poison their child as part of some larger scheme, and she was planning to frame him in the process. Taryn had chosen the wrong man to betray. In his office that night, Cole opened his evidence file and began typing. Day 2. Taryn found secondary phone with incriminating messages. Evidence suggests coordinated plan involving false allegations. Subject appears to be escalating timeline. Recommend immediate protective measures for Lennox. At the bottom, he added a new section, allies to contact. The first name he typed was Ryan Merrick, his cousin and a trauma nurse at Portland General. The second was Macon Halper, his oldest friend and someone who understood the difference between legal justice and necessary justice. Taryn had declared war on their family. Cole was going to finish at point 3 days after Lennox's poisoning. Cole met his cousin Ryan at a coffee shop downtown. She arrived straight from her shift at the hospital, still wearing scrubs under her winter coat. You look terrible, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. I need your help. Cole pushed a thumb drive across the table. But first, I need you to promise me something. Ryan picked up the drive, turning it over in her fingers. Cole, you're scaring me. Promise me that if something happens to me, anything you'll take care of Lennox. What's going on? Cole chose his words carefully. Taryn is not who I thought she was. She's dangerous, and she's targeting Lennox to get to me. I can't prove everything yet, but I will. Riney studied his face. They'd grown up together, and she knew him well enough to recognize when he was completely serious. What do you need? Legal guardianship papers. Temporary custody agreements. Whatever it takes to make sure Lennox can stay with you if something happens. Cole, just do it. Please. That evening, Cole called Macon Halper. His friend answered on the second ring, music and laughter in the background. Hold on, Macon said. Let me step outside. Cole waited, listening to the sounds of Macon leaving what sounded like a bar. His friend had done time for Grand Theft Auto in his 20s, but he'd gone straight after his release, opening a small auto repair shop. Still, Macon retained certain skills and connections that sometimes proved useful. What's up, brother? I need some equipment. Surveillance stuff. And I need it clean. How clean? Completely invisible. No records, no receipts, no questions. Macon was quiet for a moment. When do you need it? Tomorrow. That bad. Worse. The next day, Macon delivered a small box to Cole's office. Inside were 3 wireless cameras, a GPS tracker, and a digital recorder smaller than a credit card. The cameras have 90-day battery life, Macon explained. The GPS is real-time tracking with a range of 200 miles. The recorder is voice-activated and stores everything on internal memory. How much do I owe you? Nothing. But when this is over, you're going to tell me what the hell is happening. That weekend, while Taryn took Lennox to the park, Cole installed the equipment. The first camera went in Lennox's bedroom, positioned to record anyone who entered. The second went in the kitchen, focused on the area where lunch preparations took place. The third he placed in their garage, aimed at Taryn's car. The GPS tracker attached magnetically to the undercarriage of Taryn's Honda. The recorder he planted in her gym bag, nestled among her workout clothes. BY Sunday evening, Cole's surveillance network was operational. He could monitor everything from his office computer, watching live feeds and reviewing recorded footage. The GPS showed him exactly where Taryn went and how long she stayed. Monday morning brought the first results. Taryn kissed him goodbye at 7:15, saying she had errands to run before work. But the GPS tracker showed her driving east toward the foothills, far from any shopping center or workplace. She parked at a location 23 miles outside the city and stayed there for 3 hours. Cole cross-referenced the coordinates with property records. The address belonged to a remote cabin registered to Miles Corbin. That evening, when Taryn came home claiming she'd spent the day at the mall, Cole said nothing. But he'd recorded every lie, documented every deception. "How was your day?" he asked over dinner. "Boring. Just errands and shopping. You know how it is." Taryn reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm sorry I've been so distracted lately. Between work and volunteer stuff, I feel like we barely see each other. Maybe we should plan a family vacation," Cole suggested. "Somewhere relaxing." Taryn's smile flickered. "Actually, I might need to take some time off soon. My mom mentioned she might need help with some medical issues." Another lie. Cole had called Taryn's mother that afternoon, just to check. The woman was perfectly healthy and hadn't spoken to Taryn in 2 weeks. After dinner, Cole helped Lennox with her bath while Taryn made phone calls in the bedroom. Through the baby monitor, he could hear fragments of her conversation, moving too slowly. "He doesn't suspect anything. Few more weeks, and we'll be ready." When Cole tucked Lennox into bed, she wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tighter than usual. "Daddy, are you going to come live in the new house too?" "What new house, sweetheart?" "The one Mommy talks about. She says it has a big yard and I can have a pony." Cole's jaw tightened. "Has Mommy taken you to see this house?" "Not yet, but she shows me pictures on her phone. The big man lives there now, but Mommy says there's room for all of us." "All of us?" Lennox nodded solemnly. "Except maybe you. Mommy says you might want to stay here because you love work more than us." Cole forced his voice to remain calm. "That's not true, Lennox. I love you more than anything in the world." "I know, Daddy. I told Mommy that, but she said sometimes daddies change their minds." That night, Cole reviewed the kitchen camera footage from the past week. On Thursday morning, He watched Taryn prepare 2 identical lunches for Lennox. She packed the first one normally, then prepared a second lunch in which she crushed 2 pink pills into the peanut butter sandwich. She'd thrown away the first lunch and sent Lennox to school with the poison one. Cole saved the footage to his evidence file and added a new entry. Day 8. Video evidence of deliberate poisoning. Taryn preparing for next phase of plan. Subject actively manipulating Lennox with false narratives about family future. He was building an airtight case, but time was running short. Lennox's innocent comments made it clear that Taryn was accelerating her timeline. The following Saturday, while Taryn attended another fictitious volunteer meeting, Cole decided to visit Miles Corbin's cabin. He called Macon, who agreed to provide backup. "You sure about this?" Macon asked as they drove up the winding mountain road. "I need to see what she's planning." The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by Douglas firs, isolated enough that the nearest neighbor was half a mile away. Miles's truck wasn't in the driveway, but Cole could see tire tracks indicating recent activity. "How do you want to handle this?" Macon asked. "Carefully. I just need photos and information. We're not here to steal anything." The front door was locked, but Macon produced a small leather kit from his jacket. "Some skills you don't forget," he said, working the lock with practiced ease. Inside, the cabin was sparse but lived in. Military gear filled one corner: tactical vests, camping equipment, and what looked like survival supplies. Maps covered one wall, marked with routes through Oregon, Washington, and into Canada. But it was the back bedroom that made Cole's blood run cold. Someone had converted it into a child's room. Pink curtains hung in the windows, and horse-themed decorations covered the walls. A small bed sat against one wall, already made up with Disney princess sheets. Children's clothes hung in the closet, all in Lennox's size. "Jesus," Macon whispered. "How long has this been planned?" Cole photographed everything, his hands steady despite the rage building in his chest. On the nightstand beside the child's bed, he found a folder containing legal documents. His blood pressure spiked as he read through them. Custody transfer forms with Taryn's signature already notarized. A falsified birth certificate listing Miles Corbin as Lennox's father. Travel documents for crossing into Canada without a passport. But the most damning evidence was a handwritten timeline posted on the wall above a small desk. Timeline to leave the country, week 1. Document Cole's erratic behavior, week 2. Create evidence of abuse or neglect, week 3. File protective order, week 4. Emergency custody hearing, week 5. Disappear with L. Before appeals process, they were currently in week 3. Cole photographed the timeline and every document in the folder. In a drawer beneath the desk, he found printed emails between Taryn and Miles discussing their plan in detail. Cole is getting suspicious, but he doesn't have proof of anything. The key is making him look unstable when CPS investigates. The lawyer says one documented incident of child endangerment would be enough for emergency custody. Can you handle that part? Already in motion. By the time anyone figures out what really happened, we'll be across the border. Macon kept watch while Cole methodically documented everything. The bedroom wasn't just prepared for Lennox, it was a complete alternate life, ready to activate the moment Taryn could legally remove their daughter from Cole's custody. "We need to go," Macon said from the living room. Truck coming up the drive. Cole quickly returned everything to its original position and joined Macon at the front window. Miles's pickup was winding up the dirt road, still several minutes away. They slipped out the back door and made their way through the trees to where they'd parked Macon's car half a mile down the road. As they drove away, Cole's phone buzzed with a text from Taryn, running late. "Don't wait up. What's your play now?" Macon asked. Cole stared out the passenger window at the darkening forest. "I'm going to let her hang herself." That night, Cole uploaded all the photos and documents to his encrypted evidence file. The folder now contained over 200 pieces of documentation, video footage, GPS tracking data, forged legal documents, recorded conversations, and photographic evidence of premeditation. But he wasn't ready to act yet. Taryn's plan relied on making him appear unstable or abusive. If he moved too quickly, she could spin his actions as paranoid behavior, potentially giving credibility to whatever false accusations she was preparing. Instead, Cole began preparing his own legal strategy. He contacted a family law attorney and arranged to have copies of his evidence stored in multiple secure locations. He updated his will and insurance policies, ensuring that Ryan A. would have legal standing to care for Lennox if anything happened to him. Most importantly, he started documenting his own behavior with the same meticulous attention he'd given to Terrence. Video recordings of his interactions with Lennox, timestamped photos of their activities together, and detailed logs of his daily routine. When Taryn eventually made her move, he would have irrefutable proof of his own stability and devotion to his daughter. The war had escalated, but Cole was fighting on multiple fronts now. And unlike his wife, he was building a case that would hold up in court. That on Tuesday morning, Cole woke to find Taryn's side of the bed empty. She emerged from the bathroom fully dressed, her movements sharp and purposeful. "I'm filing for a protective order today," she announced without preamble. Cole set down his coffee cup slowly. "What? I can't do this anymore, Cole. The way you've been acting lately, watching me, constantly questioning everything I say. Last night you scared me." "What are you talking about?" "I went to bed at 10 o'clock. You stood in the doorway staring at me for 20 minutes. When I asked what you wanted, you just walked away without saying anything." Taryn's voice took on a trembling quality. "I'm afraid of what you might do." Cole's mind raced. He'd been in his office until midnight working on security reports, nowhere near their bedroom. But he kept his voice level. "Taryn, that didn't happen. Don't gaslight me." She grabbed her purse and headed for the garage. "I'm taking Lennox to my sister's house, and then I'm going to the courthouse." "You can't take Lennox without." "Without what?" "I'm her mother." Cole followed her to the garage, where Lennox sat in her car seat, confused by the early morning commotion. "Daddy, are we going on a trip?" she asked. "Just to Aunt Kelly's house," Taryn said, starting the engine. "Daddy has some things to figure out." As they backed out of the driveway, Cole stood in the garage watching his wife kidnap his daughter in broad daylight. Cloaked in the legitimacy of maternal concern, by noon, a sheriff's deputy was at his door with a temporary restraining order. Cole was prohibited from contacting Taryn or Lennox, approaching their schools or workplaces, or entering any residence where they might be staying. "This is standard procedure," Deputy Martinez explained. "You'll have a hearing within 10 days to contest the order." Cole read through the document, noting the fabricated incidents Taryn had reported. Aggressive behavior, threats of violence, erratic mood swings, and substance abuse. All lies, but written with enough detail to sound credible. That afternoon, Kelly Mertz from Child Protective Services arrived for an emergency home inspection. She was a thin woman in her 50s with penetrating eyes and an impatient manner. "Mr. Merrick, I'm here to assess the safety of the home environment following allegations of domestic violence and child endangerment." Cole led her through the house, answering questions about his work schedule, childcare arrangements, and relationship with Lennox. Kelly inspected the kitchen, noting the organization and cleanliness. She examined Lennox's bedroom, photographing the toys and books. "Your wife alleges that you've been exhibiting paranoid behavior and making accusations about her fidelity," Kelly said, settling into the living room with her clipboard. "Have you seen any evidence to support those claims?" Kelly consulted her notes. "She mentioned that you've been following her and questioning her about her activities. I've been concerned about some inconsistencies in her stories. Any husband would be." "What kind of inconsistencies?" Cole walked to his home office and returned with a printed folder. "Mrs. Mertz, in my profession, I analyze security threats by looking for patterns in data. When I apply those same principles to my wife's recent behavior, several red flags emerge." He opened the folder and spread out printed screenshots of phone records, GPS data, and surveillance footage. "These are call logs showing contact with Miles Corbin, a man with a criminal record who my wife claims not to know. This is GPS data from her car, showing repeated visits to his property. And this is security footage from our kitchen, showing her deliberately poisoning our daughter's lunch." Kelly's demeanor shifted as she reviewed the evidence. Her cursory inspection became a detailed examination, and her questions became more pointed. "Why didn't you report the poisoning incident immediately?" "I was gathering evidence to ensure conviction. My daughter's safety required absolute certainty about the threat." "This level of surveillance suggests what?" That I protect my family using the skills I've developed professionally? Cole's voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard. Mrs. Mertz, my wife is attempting to abduct our daughter using false allegations as cover. I have documentation proving she's been planning this for months. Kelly spent another hour reviewing Cole's evidence. When she finished, she sat back in her chair with a troubled expression. Mr. Merrick, these are serious accusations requiring investigation. However, given the nature of the evidence and your daughter's recent medical incident, I'm recommending that Lennox be placed in temporary protective custody pending a full review. With whom? Do you have a family member who could serve as an emergency guardian? Cole provided Rainey's contact information, along with the custody documents they prepared the previous week. Within hours, Lennox was transferred to Rainey's apartment, safe from both parents while the investigation proceeded. That evening, Cole sat in his empty house reviewing Taryn's tactical error. By moving too quickly and making accusations that could be disproven, she triggered a legitimate investigation that would expose her entire plan. His phone rang at 8 o'clock. Rainey's name appeared on the screen. She's okay, Rainey said immediately. Scared and confused, but physically fine. What did she tell you? A lot of things that don't add up. She keeps asking when she's going to see the house with the horses, and she's worried that you're angry with her. I need to see her. Not yet. But Cole, whatever Taryn has been telling her, Lennox knows you're the safe parent. She asked me 3 times if you were coming to get her. After the call, Cole opened his evidence file and began preparing for the custody hearing. Taryn had forced his hand, but she'd also walked directly into a trap of her own making. Detective Graves returned to the investigation with new intensity following Kelly Mertz's report to law enforcement. Armed with Cole's evidence and a search warrant, she executed a thorough investigation of both Taryn and Miles Corbin. The first break came when the crime lab processed the pill bottle Taryn had found in her gym bag. Not only were her fingerprints all over it, but the purchase records showed she'd bought it 3 days before Lennox's poisoning incident. The pharmacy security footage showed her specifically asking the pharmacist about dosage for children. Mrs. Merrick, Detective Graves, said during the recorded interview, "Can you explain why you purchased children's Benadryl when your daughter has no documented allergies?" Taryn shifted in her chair, her lawyer whispering urgent advice. "I thought she might be developing allergies. You know how kids are. But you told the doctor and the responding officers that you don't keep antihistamines in your house. I forgot about the purchase. Like I said, I was under stress." Detective Graves slid a manila folder across the table. "These are your cell phone records, Mrs. Merrick. They show 47 calls to Miles Corbin in the past month, including a 20-minute conversation on the morning your daughter was poisoned. I don't know any Miles Corbin. Mr. Corbin was at your daughter's school on the day of the incident. Multiple witnesses can place you in conversation with him." Detective Graves opened the folder. "He was also arrested this morning." Taryn's composure cracked. "Arrested for what?" "Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, child endangerment, forgery, and conspiracy to file false police reports." Detective Graves consulted her notes. Under questioning, Mr. Corbin provided a detailed statement about your relationship and your plans to leave the country with your daughter. "He's lying, is he? Because we also executed a search warrant on his property. We found a bedroom prepared for your daughter, forged legal documents with your signature, and a detailed timeline for your escape plan." Detective Graves leaned forward. "Mr. Corbin claims you initiated the entire scheme and that he was manipulated into helping you." Taryn's lawyer called for a recess, but the damage was done. Under pressure and facing serious federal charges, Miles Corbin had thrown Taryn completely under the bus, painting himself as a lovesick fool manipulated by a calculating woman. His statement, provided to detectives in exchange for a reduced sentence, detailed every aspect of their plan. Taryn had approached him 6 months earlier, claiming her husband was abusive and she needed help escaping. She convinced him to rent the cabin and prepare it for Lennox, telling him they would eventually get married and raise the child together. The poisoning had been Taryn's idea, a way to create evidence of Cole's negligence that could be used in court. Miles had objected, but Taryn assured him the dose was too small to cause permanent harm. The false domestic violence allegations were the final phase, designed to give Taryn legal cover for disappearing with Lennox, while Cole fought the charges. She told me he was dangerous, Miles said in his recorded statement. Said he'd threatened to kill her if she tried to leave. I thought I was protecting a woman and her kid. The recorded evidence told a different story. Phone conversations between Taryn and Miles revealed her as the architect of the entire plan, coldly calculating each step and dismissing Miles's concerns about the legal consequences. In one particularly damning recording, Taryn discussed Cole with casual cruelty. He's too methodical to suspect anything until it's too late. By the time he figures out what's happening, we'll be in Canada and he'll be fighting felony charges. Armed with this evidence, the district attorney filed formal charges against Taryn. Attempted kidnapping, child endangerment, conspiracy, forgery, perjury, and filing false police reports. The restraining order against Cole was dismissed, and emergency custody was granted pending a full hearing. That evening, Cole sat in Rainey's living room while Lennox colored at the coffee table, finally safe and ignorant of the legal machinery grinding toward justice. "Daddy, when can we go home?" she asked without looking up from her drawing. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." Rainey handed him a cup of coffee and sat beside him on the couch. "What happens now?" Cole watched his daughter carefully shade a picture of their house, complete with all three family members standing in the front yard. But in her drawing, Taryn was now just a vague outline, barely more than a shadow. Now we make sure this never happens again. The trial began 3 months later in a downtown Portland courtroom that felt more like a corporate boardroom than a place where families were destroyed. Cole sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, watching Taryn enter in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit that drained all the color from her face. She'd lost weight during her time in county jail, and the confident woman who'd once manipulated everyone around her now looked small and defeated. When her eyes found Cole across the courtroom, he saw something that might have been regret, but more likely was simply fear of the consequences finally catching up to her. District Attorney Patricia Valdez opened with a statement that laid out the case in stark terms. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about a mother who chose to poison her own child as part of an elaborate scheme to steal that child from her father and flee the country." Taryn's defense attorney, a public defender named James Morrison, attempted to paint her as a victim of domestic abuse who'd made desperate choices to protect her daughter. But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and Miles Corbin's cooperation had removed any possibility of claiming she'd acted alone. The prosecution's first witness was Detective Graves, who methodically presented the physical evidence: the pharmacy receipts, the pill bottle with Taryn's fingerprints, the GPS tracking data, and the surveillance footage from Cole's kitchen cameras. "In my 20 years of investigating crimes against children," Detective Graves testified, "I've rarely seen such premeditated and calculated behavior from a parent." When Morrison cross-examined, he tried to suggest that Cole's surveillance of his wife was evidence of controlling behavior, but Detective Graves shut that down quickly. Mr. Merrick's surveillance began after his daughter was poisoned, and he suspected his wife was responsible. His actions were those of a father protecting his child, not a husband trying to control his wife. The second day of testimony focused on the forged documents and escape plan found at Miles Corbin's cabin. Handwriting experts confirmed that Taryn had signed the false custody papers and helped create the fabricated birth certificate, but it was Miles Corbin's testimony that delivered the final blow to Taryn's defense. Taking the stand in shackles, the former soldier painted a picture of manipulation and deception that went back months. Under oath, he described how Taryn had seduced him with stories of abuse and promises of a new life together. "She told me Cole was violent and unstable," Miles testified, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said he'd threatened to kill her if she tried to leave. She showed me bruises on her arms and said he'd done it." "Did you ever witness Mr. Merrick being violent toward his wife?" Valdez asked. "No, I never met him until the day at the school." "Did you question Mrs. Merrick about the inconsistencies in her stories?" Miles glanced toward Taryn, who stared straight ahead with no expression. "When I asked too many questions, she'd get angry. So I didn't trust her, that I was just like all the other men who disappointed her." The most damaging testimony came when Valdez played the recorded phone conversations between Taryn and Miles. The jury listened in horrified silence as Taryn casually discussed poisoning her daughter and framing her husband. The dose needs to be small enough that she won't be seriously hurt, but large enough that the hospital will have to report it, Taryn's voice said through the courtroom speakers. Once CPS gets involved, I can start building the abuse narrative. When Morrison attempted to cross-examine Miles, the man broke down completely. I thought I was helping save a woman and her kid, he sobbed. I never would have done any of this if I'd known she was lying about everything. That little girl almost died because I was stupid enough to believe her. During the defense phase, Morrison called character witnesses who testified about Taryn's involvement in community activities and her apparent devotion to Lennox. But under cross-examination, several of these witnesses admitted they'd never actually seen Taryn and Cole interact as a couple and had no knowledge of their private life. Taryn herself never took the stand. Morrison explained to reporters that her emotional state made testimony inadvisable, but Cole suspected the real reason was that any competent prosecutor would have destroyed her on cross-examination. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Scene 2. The trial. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Patricia Hendricks asked on Friday afternoon. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man who'd taken careful notes throughout the trial, stood with a folded paper in his hands. We have, Your Honor, on the charge of attempted kidnapping in the first degree, how do you find guilty? On the charge of child endangerment in the first degree, how do you find guilty? On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, how do you find guilty? The litany continued through all 7 charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Cole felt no satisfaction as he watched Taryn's shoulders shake with silent sobs. This wasn't justice, it was simply the inevitable consequence of her choices. Justice would be raising Lennox in safety, far from the chaos Taryn had tried to create. Judge Hendricks scheduled sentencing for the following week, but she addressed Taryn directly before adjourning. Mrs. Merrick, I've presided over many difficult cases involving crimes against children, but I've rarely encountered such calculated betrayal of the fundamental trust between parent and child. Your actions endangered your daughter's life and traumatized her in ways that may take years to heal. The sentencing hearing took place the following Friday. Cole arrived early and took a seat in the front row, where Taryn would be able to see him clearly. When the bailiff brought her into the courtroom, she immediately found his face and held his gaze for several long seconds. Judge Hendricks reviewed the pre-sentence report and the impact statements before addressing Taryn. Mrs. Merrick, you have the right to make a statement before I impose sentence. Do you wish to do so? Taryn stood slowly, her hands shaking as she gripped the podium. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Your Honor, I know I made mistakes. I was confused and scared, and I didn't handle things the right way. She turned toward Cole, tears streaming down her face. Cole, I'm sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. If you could find it in your heart to ask for a reduced sentence for Lennox's sake. Cole stood up slowly, his movement causing a ripple of attention throughout the courtroom. Judge Hendricks raised an eyebrow, but didn't object when he stepped forward. Your Honor, may I respond? You may. Cole walked to within 10 feet of Taryn, close enough to see the desperate hope in her eyes. When he spoke, his voice was calm and clear. Taryn, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to poison our daughter. You chose to forge legal documents. You chose to file false police reports. You chose to try to steal Lennox from the only stable home she's ever known. Taryn's face crumpled, but Cole continued without mercy. You asked me to find forgiveness in my heart. But forgiveness requires remorse, and remorse requires accepting responsibility for what you've done. You're still calling your crimes mistakes and asking me to help you escape the consequences. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. There's no forgiveness here, Taryn. Only consequences. You tried to erase me from my daughter's life, and you used her as a weapon to do it. The only mercy you deserve is that I'm not asking for the maximum sentence. Cole turned to Judge Hendricks. Your Honor, I request that Mrs. Merrick serve whatever sentence you deem appropriate, with no possibility of early release. My daughter needs to know that when someone tries to hurt her, there are real consequences. Judge Hendricks nodded grimly. Mr. Merrick, thank you for your statement. Mrs. Merrick, please be seated. The judge consulted her notes for several minutes before pronouncing sentence. Mrs. Merrick, your crimes represent a profound betrayal of the most fundamental relationship in our society, that between parent and child. You endangered your daughter's life, attempted to steal her from her father, and created elaborate lies to cover your actions. Taking into account the premeditated nature of these crimes, the vulnerability of the victim, and the lasting trauma inflicted, I sentence you to 12 years in the Oregon Department of Corrections, with no possibility of parole for the first 6 years. Taryn collapsed in her chair, as if the words were physical blows. Her attorney put a steadying hand on her shoulder, but she was beyond comfort. Additionally, I'm issuing a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with a minor child, and I'm terminating your parental rights effective immediately. As the bailiff moved to escort Taryn back to custody, she turned one last time toward Cole. Her mouth moved silently, forming words he couldn't hear. Then she was gone, disappeared through the door that led back to the holding cells. Cole remained seated as the courtroom emptied, processing the finality of what had just occurred. 12 years. Lennox would be 17 when Taryn was eligible for release, old enough to make her own decisions about contact with her biological mother. 6 months later, Cole stood in Lennox's new bedroom, watching Macon install the last shelf on the wall. They bought a house across town smaller than their old place, but bright and clean, with a yard where Lennox could play safely. That should do it, Macon said, stepping back to admire his work. She's got enough storage for about 1,000 books now. She'll need it. Cole handed him a beer from the small cooler they'd brought upstairs. Thank you for helping with this. Anytime, brother. How's she adjusting? Cole looked out the window toward the backyard, where Lennox was playing on the swing set they'd installed the previous weekend. Rhine sat on the porch steps, reading a book, but keeping one eye on her honorary niece. Better than I expected. She still has nightmares sometimes, but they're getting less frequent. And you? Cole considered the question. I sleep better knowing she's safe. They worked in comfortable silence for another hour, hanging pictures and arranging furniture. When they finished, the room looked like it belonged to a happy 6-year-old rather than a child who'd survived trauma. That evening, after Macon and Rhine had gone home, Cole sat on Lennox's bed reading her a story about a brave princess who saved herself. Lennox interrupted halfway through. Daddy, is Mommy ever coming back? Cole had been dreading this question for months, but when it finally came, he found he was ready for it. No, sweetheart. Mommy made some very bad choices, and she has to stay away for a long time. Forever. She's gone for good. Lennox considered this with the serious expression she'd inherited from him. Are you sad about that? Cole set the book aside and looked directly into his daughter's eyes. I'm sad that she hurt you, but I'm not sad that she can't hurt you anymore. Will anyone else try to hurt me? Cole knelt beside the bed and took Lennox's small hands in his. I'll never let anyone hurt you again. Ever. That's a promise. Lennox nodded solemnly, then hugged him with the fierce intensity of a child who'd learned that the world could be dangerous, but that some people could be trusted completely. After she fell asleep, Cole went to his home office and opened the file cabinet where he kept all the legal documents from the trial. Everything was organized and secured: custody papers, restraining orders, and financial records that ensured Lennox's future was protected. He opened his laptop and typed a final entry in the evidence file he'd maintained throughout the investigation. Date 247, Taryn Merrick sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. Parental rights permanently terminated. Lennox adjusting well to new home. Case closed. Cole saved the file, and then, for the first time since this had all begun, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what they'd survived. He sat alone in his office and cried quietly, so as not to wake Lennox, but completely. He cried for the marriage that had been built on lies, for the family that had been destroyed by betrayal, and for the innocence his daughter had lost. Then he dried his eyes, closed the laptop, and went to check on Lennox one more time. She slept peacefully in her new room, surrounded by books and toys, and the absolute certainty that her father would protect her from anything that tried to harm her. Cole stood in her doorway for a long time, watching her breathe. Tomorrow he would take her to her first day of first grade in their new school district. They would build new routines, make new friends, and create a life based on truth rather than deception. Taryn had tried to erase him from his daughter's life, but in the end, she had only erased herself. Cole turned off the hallway light and went to his own room, finally ready to sleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring.